Thank you all for being early. It's 8:59, and we're already ready to go here. I've been told by Todd that we can actually stay just a little bit longer, so the choir doesn't need to come in. So if someone could stop me at 9:45 or 9:50, we'll start to see the barbarians at the gate, you know. But that's one of the good pieces of news. Good or bad is this lengthy packet here for session number 3. I sent that out yesterday morning, and here it is. You should grab one if you haven't. And I just kept on putting more and more goodies in there because I felt like they were important. I was starting to get really excited for next month and June 7th. And so hope that you're excited as well. And the hardest part is we're already getting there. The names are in, the places are in, and we've got this wonderful group of people. Let's begin in prayer as before I forget. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Loving God, you gave us, your faithful people, this mystery called the church. Help us to be its hands and feet in this world. Help us to be like you. Help us to serve the church for your will. Help bless this time that we have together as we continue our formation, as we confirm the faith that you have in us. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. Here come the kozas here, and so we can begin. So they're on the back here. Hugo's looking for it. Yeah. There you go. We got the high school history teacher to help. There we go. It is 19 pages long. Apologies. You can commit it to memory this week. But I was just overwhelmed. We got 3 more coming in here, Garrett in the back. I was just overwhelmed as I compiled this document and sent it to the diocese. By that I mean Appendix D, the list of all of you and where you were baptized. It just, I just started to get weepy, thinking about all these churches all across the country and all across the world that birthed you guys, and then making your way here. It meant a lot to you. Some of those churches, they no longer exist, which is amazing. And so some of you were baptized in churches that are no more. A lot of you are baptized in churches which are now combined, and now you're being confirmed into this church here at St. Timothy's, and that's just a real special honor for me. A lot of the folks on Saturday who I talked to, our Spanish-speaking congregation, you all thought that it's hard coming up with your baptismal date. Some of them don't know their birthday, because they grew up in El Salvador during the Civil War, and so they have no knowledge of their birthday. And just mind-blowing thought process. I think that Wanda Rickson wins the award for searching out her baptismal site. She was knocking on doors and driving around Alexandria trying to figure out the church that she was baptized from has been through 3 or 4 iterations, and then she wins an award, and then Greg, her husband, along with Paul, you guys win awards for having your actual baptismal certificates. Those are just beautiful documents, and I love Paul's, the military ordinariate. I don't know exactly what that is, but that sounds official. Then you have yours truly is down here. And I was baptized by my grandfather, who is an Episcopal priest, in St. Mary's, Fleeton, Virginia, which is on the northern neck near Reedville. If you've ever been there, tiny church. That's real special to me as well. We in the Episcopal Church, the Roman Catholic Church has 7 sacraments. The Protestant Church has 2. So Luther came in and said, where'd you get all those sacraments? There's only 2 actually in the Bible, baptism and Eucharist. And the Episcopal Church, we split the difference. We said, we have 2, plus 5. And so that's our formulation. We have baptism and Eucharist, which are sacraments, and then sacramental rites. Again, Episcopals have terms for everything. And those are confirmation, marriage, confession, funeral, what's that? Ordination. There you go. Sacramental rites. Yeah. And so you think of a capital S, baptism and Eucharist, and then sacramental rites. This is what we're doing here. It's interesting, confirmation, doing this with youth and doing this with the adults. Confirmation is a mature affirmation of faith. That's what our prayer book reads. And the irony is that the church, in its wisdom, decided that the age for confirmation, and the Diocese of Virginia believes this too, should be around 14. And that is the exact age in which children rebel from their parents. And so the thinking is just an odd thinking that you say, okay, we're going to do this then, and are rebelling against the church. And then, but the problem is then you become this thing, do you do it before, at age 12, 11? Is that too young? Or do you do it after, at 16 or 17, and then by that time, the kids are gone? You know, so it's hard. And so the answer that we all give is that it's different for every single person. We're always maturing into our faith. When do we ever become actually mature enough? I don't know. And so that's the thinking I always give for about that. Notice on this list, and if anybody wants to say anything about this list, they can. A few of us are not going to be able to be confirmed here. They're going to be confirmed or received at a local church in yellow there, St. David's in Ashburn. And then notice this list of reaffirmation. That's entirely our Spanish language folk. And think about all of them deciding to get reaffirmed on that Saturday. Think of all that they've been through, and it's really heartwarming to me. So, skip over a page or two, the list of the confirmations. You know, you probably needed this information like you need a hole in the head, but like you got a history guy here doing this, and so it's just fascinating to me, like thinking about all these people who've been confirmed in this church. This church, of course, is only was consecrated around when I was born. So before that, we were in the old church on Gray Street, and before that, we were somewhere. I don't know. That first confirmation, Susan Killam, I'll have to do some research and figure out some more information about that. The Methodist Church, which I believe no longer exists, and I mean they moved, and then once the old church, and then all those confirmands, year by year by year. 1981, that's the first year that, or I highlighted that because that's the most amount of confirmations here at St. Timothy's in its history. But guess what? We're going to beat that number this year. The first confirmations in this building, so in Henry Hall, was in 1969, and you can't make this stuff up. I was looking through all of our books, and I was hoping that there was somebody in that list of who was confirmed who is still a member here, and so I could ask them what it was like, and there wasn't, or I didn't know, but I recognized one name, and I was like, oh, how do I know his name? His name is Jim Baird, B-A-I-R-D, and Jim Baird was the person who was instrumental in getting this organ here from Massachusetts, and so he lives in Bealton, Virginia now, and I took a chance, called him up. He answers right there, 90-year-old man, and I'm like, I'm from St. Timothy's in Herndon. He's like, where? And so we had this great conversation, and he told me all about the organ, and I shared this with all going up to Massachusetts and bringing it back in a U-Haul. It's just incredible. And he was the first group that was confirmed in Henry Hall. And he said that there wasn't running water, so they had to get like water from the rectory and bring it over and things like that. He said that they, on the way back from Massachusetts, they wanted to go and see Times Square, so they took the U-Haul, this is 1969, through Times Square with that organ in the back, and I don't quite know how it all happened. So you are a part of these stories too as we move forward. A few years ago, the diocese stopped doing annual bishops' visits, and so we have them every 2 years, and we have this big bumper crop this year. I'm so excited about it. If you don't mind, if you want to turn to, if you got a prayer book in front of you or you faithfully brought your one in, by the way, you will get a new prayer book, and I will sign it, and the bishop will sign it. So my hope is that at the end of this, you'll return your tattered one, and you'll get we've already ordered them, the brand new ones. But here's 845, there's this thing called the Catechism, and that should sound like a strange word, and it means, in Greek, it means echo. So back in the day, when teachers would teach, the kids would respond and say the same thing. Pedagogy isn't what it is today. And so catechism simply meant, I would say, what are we by nature? We are part of God's creation, and you would say that back. And I remember my confirmation class being similar to that. In some ways, I just remember sitting in the rector's some room, with a bunch of surly teenagers and us reading the catechism. And amazingly, I'm here, right, doing this again. And hopefully it's a little bit more fun. I should point this out to you because this is just a strange way to begin the catechism for your faith. And this is an example of how this document, the Book of Common Prayer in 1979, was a revolutionary document at the time, and still is, 50 years later. An outline of the faith, and it starts with human nature. It starts by talking about us here, us human beings. And the liturgical reform of the 60s and 70s, the church, as society was going through all these changes, around civil rights and women's equality, and you name it, during the 60s and 70s, the church was as well, church capital C. Vatican II happened, all these things were happening, and this prayer book is an outgrowth of that, 1979, and it kind of encapsulates all those things. That's why a lot of people don't like it, because it was new. And people said, a bunch of hippies wrote this thing, And one of the things that the hippies said, it's funny that we consider this the new prayer book, and it's almost 50 years old now. They started with human nature, not with God, but with us. It's just an interesting focus. This isn't your grandfather's prayer book. It's a reminder that the created order is good. We all remember from history class the Jonathan Edwards sermon, "Sinners in the hand of an angry God," and then we're all on the spider web, we're all there, and sin's going to catch us. The prayer book is a way to move away from that and toward an understanding of life and of God in a different way. And so we'll talk a lot about worship today, that our weekly service, is a celebration of the Eucharist. We move away from words like sacrifice, atonement, penitence, and so that's this prayer book's thing. That's what it's moving towards. God created the world; it's good. This is not gloomy. We do have confession. We do have Rite One, but the focus isn't there as much. As in other denominations or previous prayer books. Just moving to page 846, if you turn around, we talk about God the Father here, and all the talk about pronouns, and all the talk about gender. And just, you can hear the language, and it's pretty balanced, even from 1979's perspective, in terms of we have a God who is both personal and a living God, so it's not an it, but we also have a God who's transcendent, so not a he, right? This is just, again, like if you can understand this, then you're at the front of the class, right? God is both here and now. God is with us. God was incarnate in the person of Jesus Christ, who was a male, and at the same time, God is out there. God is, unfathomable. And that means that God is not like us. God is not anthropological. So that's just a real tough thing. I always tell people, when you get bored in church, you should do what I did when I was 14 and just leaf through the catechism or leaf through these documents at the end, and there's some pretty good stuff. Turning to page 855. A lot of this is pretty boilerplate. And page 855, we're going to get into this idea of worship and the importance of worship and the relationship between what we believe and how we worship. And as Episcopalians, we believe in this thing that we worship first, and that creates what we believe, rather than the other way around. And so you can get that on page 855, maybe not on 855, maybe 856. You do that. It's not a matter of we got all the wise guys together who came up with all these documents, and then we try to put that in place. The living, breathing community that meets every week, that's what's determining our theology. So it's, the big words are orthopraxy. Ortho means straight, praxy means practice, versus over orthodoxy. Ortho meaning straight, doxy meaning belief. So in other words, our actions and our worship are more important than our beliefs. Beliefs are important, but our practice and our worship create our beliefs, not the other way around. Okay. And then just look at 859 just to come through. This is a good way of all these arguments that over the centuries are kind of on this page when they talk about the Holy Eucharist. By what other names is this service known? It sounds like such an innocuous question. It's loaded, and that was a big fight in the Reform. The Holy Eucharist is called the Lord's Supper and Holy Communion. It is also known as the Divine Liturgy, the Mass, and the Great Offering. So what do we do here? Oftentimes people call it a Mass. That's a Catholic thing. For the end of the service, in Latin, there was a word for you're being sent, and that's the Mass. The Divine Liturgy, that's what it's called in the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, so Greek, Russian, Romanian, that sort of thing. And Eucharist, we Episcopalians like that because we're sending it back to the early church. That's a name for it. Eucharist just means thanksgiving. And it's the same way that sometimes more Protestants call this a table versus calling it an altar. And different focuses, different ideas, and all are good. And the different ways that we think about them is created by the language. So, and then there's one more, just big one here. We'll wait for it and get for it. Any questions on this? I didn't think so. Okay. All right. If you turn to page 9, we'll get into it a little bit more on your big old handout here when it says 9:30 a.m. service, and this will give us an example of the different names and the different focuses of worship. And I took these 2 years ago. I put these in here, and so I'm using the same ones. And so these aren't this Sunday's. But this first service on page 9 is from our Episcopal brethren of up the road at St. Matthew's Sterling. And then if you flip over to page 10, that's from our Episcopal brethren at St. Anne's in Reston. And so I talked a lot about how the Episcopal Church, we're neither Protestant, we're neither Catholic, we're right in the middle. But then even within the Episcopal Church, you have a wide breadth of what Episcopal worship is like. And even in that breadth, we're all three of these churches are within 5 miles of each other. You're going to have different emphases, different styles, different theology, same God, same denomination, very different thing. And it can be the shorthand for it. I can walk you through it. But these terms are just they're loaded, so you have to just take everything with a grain of salt. That in the church you have high, low, and broad. Okay, so low church is low and lazy. Okay, then you have high church, which is high and crazy, and then you have the broad church in the center. Okay, high church is more Roman Catholic. Low church is more Protestant. Broad church is more in the middle. And so a lot of the arguments in the 19th century the Episcopal Church was going through in the 20th century and even up until today are around those terms. But they're loaded in the same way that saying a church is conservative or a church is liberal. Like, what do you mean by that? And usually you think Republican and Democrat because we're thinking politics, and it's just those descriptors just don't kind of work. But we're dealing in generalizations so that we have to as we do this. And so notice this is, again, by our friends up the road. Notice how different the bulletin is. Notice how they're not using the hymnal, song, river, song, shelter. That's praise worship. Okay? They only have one reading from the gospel, right? Remember I told you that you actually hear more, in most Episcopal churches, you hear more scripture than you do in most other denominations. Here's an example. There's only one reading. Notice how they don't do the offertory. You can make a donation through the website and everything like that. That's one thing that people struggle with here. I'm always getting discussion about how we do the offertory because some people don't like that image of the plate being passed around and not putting something in there. It's a hard thing to do for a lot of people. Same thing with the confession, doing the confession together. And that's my guess why they don't do it, is because they don't want newcomers to feel, like what's going on with this plate here. When he does the Eucharistic prayer, this is Father Rob at St. Matthew's, he does it extemporaneously. And so you see me every week, I sit up there and I read the thing, and I can almost do it by memory because I've done it so many times. He just improvs. And this is not something the Episcopal Church usually does, but it's something that a different flavor, a denomination does all the time. And so it's just a different thing. And a lot of times people will say, oh gosh, this is so boring. You do something every single time. I invite those people to go to a church which improvs a lot and see if you like it. And so a lot of times people are like, oh my gosh, this is terrifying. I have no idea what they're going to say next. And so an expression sometimes used about the prayer book is that the prayer book protects me from you and you from me. And that means that I can't just make it up here. I can't just say, well, I'm going to do this. This is not the Church of Charles. It's the Church of the Book of Common Prayer that we all have together. And of course, you're going to get inflections of my personality, and you're going to get inflections of everybody's personality. That's why we're human beings. But the Book of Common Prayer, it's easy cop-out. I just say, well, it's in the Book of Common Prayer, but it is your job to push back against on it, like Brooke did last week. So that's in Sterling. Let's flip the page 10. This is, again, I'm friends with Jess at St. Anne's. I'm friends with Rob at St. Matthew's. And this happens to be the Mother's Day service, again, from 2 years ago. And so instead of doing the Nicene Creed, they do the affirmation of faith. And just notice how different it is. At that church at St. Anne's, they don't say, "The Lord be with you." They say, "God be with you." And the understanding that in many contexts, the word Lord is problematic. And so I don't actually understand how it is problematic, so I'm not going to kind of describe to you, but that's just an example. In the gendered language, that there's a lot of he's, a lot of sons, a lot of fathers, and if you start counting them up in our service, there are a lot. And so that they're removed from them and replaced with the one or God, and so it takes on a different flavor. So yeah, the peace of Christ be always with you. I say the peace of the Lord be always with you. The Lord be with you. This says Christ be with you. Wondrous are you, Holy One of blessing. Any comments or thoughts on that? These are examples of the breadth of the Episcopal Church, the ways that you can use the Book of Common Prayer and maybe stretch them a little bit. Yes, Wanda.
So, do you think that a church, a parish, so we've got us and St. Anne's and then St. Matthew's, takes on the personality that drives how they conduct their services and that by the congregation or by the rector, or a little bit of both? Is it kind of a blending?
The question was, does the congregation take on the drive of the congregants or the clergy leadership? And I'm going to let Patrick answer that.
I can't answer that, but I was more interested in just the dynamic, the diversity of the music program within churches. Like I haven't been to Lake Ann in a long time, but if I recall, they had a very dynamic music program, and nothing against ours, but I mean like playing guitar and stuff like that, and a band and stuff like that. So.
I wish that Jess and Rob could come in and answer these questions for themselves. Like I truly do, because I don't want to speak for them, but I'm going to. And I'll say one of the things that when newcomers come to this church, or when I'm interviewing a seminarian, I say, there are many. You're in luck. There are many Episcopal churches within driving distance of here. The consumer, you have choices, and my job is to help you find God in whatever way that you can. And if you want to do what's right for my family, come to this church. If you want to do what's right for your family, let's have a conversation about the different churches in this area that are stone's throws from each other, that offer different emphases and everything like that. So I can't answer. I would say it's a combination that oftentimes churches call clergy that fit their persona. Sometimes churches call clergy that do not fit their persona, and things get sideways. St. Anne's was built. It was started in Lake Ann as a storefront, when Reston was in its wild and woolly days, and it was started as this great social experiment of racial equality and progressive politics, and I think it's lived out that all its time. I think it's stayed there, and Jess, I just know this, she said sometimes it's hard because they're still stuck there, like it's still 1970, in some ways, and it's not, obviously it's 2025, and St. Matthew's was a church plan of St. Timothy's, and I think it's safe to say it's more conservative theologically than we are, and definitely than St. Anne's is, and I couldn't tell you why. I can't tell you why there's a praise band there. I have no idea. I know there is, and I know that some people love it, and I know some people don't like it. And so again, it's lucky that you can hear a world-class organ, or you can go hear these songs outside of our. That's really great. Yes. Here, let me hand you this.
when God telling us to think like kids, like children, He want us to not, because as adults we overthink sometimes. He want us to like imagine what heaven like, imagine what prayer like, and like be more intimate with Him, so we can draw closer to Him and be great Christians to the world and prove that God is a living testimony to the world.
I agree, and thank you, Jermaine. I would say in my leadership here, we're pretty Episcopal down the road, and that's very heady. We're pretty standard. I'm not creative enough to have anything else. I also will admit that I'm pretty goofy, and I don't take myself too seriously. And that's what I hope in your question. This is why I'm answering it that way. Take Jesus seriously. Don't take yourself too seriously in this work. You know, that's what someone told me when I was entering seminary. You know, it's the most important thing we do. You're not that important as we do it. And how can you live that out like children, you know, with the joy of children? And that's what I found it accidentally almost as a fit here with me, that most people describe St. Timothy's as welcoming and as not stuffy. And that is a criticism of the Episcopal Church. And I would describe neither St. Anne's or St. Matt's as stuffy in the slightest. You know, please, Frederick.
Thanks, Charles. I really appreciate the way that you're speaking this, you know, as a history teacher, you know. But my question is there some set of requirements for an Episcopal church, right? Sort of a standard, like Episcopal Church has A, B, C, you know. Now I know the Book of Common Prayer has a lot of practices in it, but as far as like yourself as the leader of this particular church, and then I guess the team kind of around you, is there some compliance that you have to, like, here's what we can do? So like music, you know, you can have music, right? Because like in the morning service, you don't have music. So it's an optional kind of thing. And if you do have music, it can be, you know, a band, it can be piano, organ, what have you. I'm just curious as if there's some common set of requirements for an Episcopal church.
Yes, and you've already given the answer, that the answers are in the Book of Common Prayers, and the rubric's there. I think what you're asking is more deliberate and intentional than that. Like, how often does corporate come and be like, well, wait a second, you know, like this, like, what are you doing here? And I would answer very rarely. On the other hand, you know, the directive that came down, remember, about intincting. So the new bishop came in and said that you, the lay people, were no longer supposed to intinct, that the clergy and people behind the altar had to claim. That was an example of a bishop's directive, a fiat, of something that is rare, you know, but it happens. With the prayer book, I always tell this story. So this came out in 1979. They had trial versions before that. Many of you were alive for that. Called them the Prayer Book Wars. And there was one that had a zebra front. There was one that was green, I think. And so all during the 70s, it was all like you were trying these things out. And then finally, they came up with this, lots of money, lots of time, and they printed them. But some people wanted to stick with the old one, the 1928. And some people, but it was no longer authorized. You couldn't. The bishop said you couldn't. Like, you were not allowed. And at my old church, there's the famous story that, you know, they kept, at the 8 o'clock, they kept using the 28 prayer book past that. And then one day the bishop came and he saw a rack of, he was on a visit and he saw a rack of 1928 prayer books and he said, get them out. You know, and so that happens. Now, I've never worked at Starbucks, you know, but I'm guessing that happens a lot at, like, different places where they're saying these are standards and you got to do them. And I would say I granted a fair amount of autonomy, and in a way, especially in Virginia. Again, Virginia is a low church, and that means that each parish has more power, relatively speaking, than in a high church diocese, where the bishop has more power and snaps his fingers. This all came up during COVID. It was so hard because all of a sudden you needed directives that go out that everyone to follow, and people were like, well, I'm used to playing my own hymns. Like it was very, very hard, and I'm sure that in your work that you encountered the same thing. Like this is, yeah, Patrick. Sorry, the people, yeah, I'm sorry.
Number one, I want to thank you. You clarified my question a little bit forward regarding like what are the requirements, and I think what is like an example of a high church then? You say Virginia is the low church. I've been to the National Cathedral, that service, particularly at Christmas time, and that is an amazing experience if you haven't attended. But what are the criteria, in the sense of the sermon?
Right. What is high church? Another term that gets used is Anglo-Catholic. That's our expression. And the closest one is maybe the only one, is Grace Alexandria on Russell Road in Alexandria. And it's known as the high church bastion of the Diocese of Virginia. If you were to go to the Midwest, to Wisconsin, to parts of New York, it's all high church, and it's all everyone's called father. My sermon today is about how I don't like being called father, so just warning, and the reasons why. A famous scene at the seminary, at Virginia Theological Seminary, at some point they had, on the pews, they had crosses on each pew, and that is an example. This is a stereotype, this is a generalization. That is an example of high church. Ornamentation, decoration, smells and bells, that sort of thing, like the representations of Jesus everywhere. Like Luther came in and he was like an iconoclast and said, it's all about the Bible. It's all about the printed word. Why do we have these, tons of stained glass and ornamented cathedrals and everything? And so in that seminary, the story goes, the guy, this is in the 1840s, guy comes in and knocks them all off, because he says that's pagan. That's Romish. Somewhere like in this here you'll see the word Romish, R-O-M-I-S-H, and that's a slur, a Protestant slur against the Roman Catholic Church, declaring it simply, it's just pagan, and that's mean. But if you want to go there, and that'll have incense, and the person will kiss the Bible. Those elaborate rituals. I had friends who, in more high church dioceses, who, when they got ordained, they planked, for less of a better word. They knelt down and prostrated. I'm not going to do that, and I can kneel. But that's just a different, and God bless them, like not me, but God bless them, Does that answer your question? There's a commensurate, idea that the music tradition and the preaching tradition aren't as strong in those high church places. And again, I'm biased when I say this, that sometimes in those places, because the ritual is so important, because that takes on a life of its own, the sermon is just an afterthought. And medieval preaching was criticized, this is the Roman Catholic Church, was criticized that every preacher just had an encyclopedia of sermons, and they'd say, I'm going to do a sermon on forgiveness, and they would turn to page A55 and read that sermon. Whereas Luther and the Protestants was all about preaching and all about music. And that's not to say that high churches can't have great music or can't have great preaching. But there's just different emphases. I'm loving this conversation. This is just so rich and so wonderful, and it'd probably be useful, to force you to go to another Episcopal church or force you to go to another, but don't only go once, as they say. Okay, let's look through here. Please don't stop with the questions. Oh yeah, this is getting back to you, Patrick. This next one, Patrick said, it would be really cool if we could study how all the prayers went down from century to century to century to prayer book, and I was like, you asked for it, I gave it to you. You know, like this is the most confusing thing I've ever seen. This is my seminary notes that I took, and how like the prayers go from one, you know, prayer to the other. And so of course, like when we were designing this prayer book, by we I mean the prayer book authors, they were thinking, well, how can we get back to the early church? Not ideally like something else. It was like, how are we faithful to those early church practices in the 21st century context? And so it's amazing that you can see all these things, and to explain them all, this would take, I mean, you'd have to go to seminary for this. You know, it's so complicated. And so what my idea was, like, I'm just gonna, you know, give this all to you, and you can take it home, and then hopefully you'll become the world's greatest biblical theologian because of this. But all these prayers are going this way and that, and they're beautiful. And you could read my chicken scratch, more power to you. But it all has a meaning, and all has a background. It's amazing because you guys all know this. You all know the deep wisdom of this prayer book, but you know it in a deeper way than like memorizing the sheet. You know it in a way because you've lived it for decades, you know, or only a year or two, you know, like and you know it that way rather than being like you just have to kind of skim the surface. Like you know the difference between right and what one, right two. Yes, Garrett, thank you.
Are the 5 areas, West, East Syrian, Alexandrian, Roman, and Galilean, are those the original 5 patriarchs? Before there was just one pope, there were 5 patriarchs in the church.
Maybe. I don't know if you can, I would say there are probably more 5 different families of early church worship that are extant. You know, I wouldn't say that, I think I know what your question means about there was, but I don't think that corresponds to that. Yeah.
Because there was a patriarch in Alexandria, there was a patriarch in Rome.
Right, yeah.
And they called the patriarch in Rome the Pope. Who
Right,
now is
yeah.
The Pope.
I wish it were that easy. Yeah. And that would be helpful if it did that. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. And so famously, Eucharistic prayer C, if you can see that on this side, and you can see that on that side, Eucharistic prayer C is, I should have mentioned this last week, is the Star Wars prayer, and it was written in the context of the Apollo missions, and the writer, that's the one that says galaxies and things like that, and many instances in our prayer book, they're talking about the world, meaning cosmos. Older prayer books, especially English prayer books, talked a lot about the sea, because England's an island. And so there are a lot of things about, a lot of prayers for the Navy, a lot of prayers for fishermen, a lot of prayers for like what happens to us on land and sea. And then in this prayer book added, you know, the world, you know, and it's both a cosmopolitan standpoint of thinking about ourselves in the universe, but also thinking about, you know, our astronauts heading up into space at that exact time. That's a sermon for another day, though. Okay. All right, how are we doing here? All right. This pages 14, 15, that tells just a list of all the differences between our prayer book, our current prayer book, and the former prayer book. And if you wanted to shorten it down, you'd say, former prayer book, Rite 1, penitential. Current prayer book, Rite 2, celebrational. So but this has its own biases as well. See my time here. Okay, we're getting close to the end here, guys. I'll just end with talking about this fascinating Greek word anamnesis. And anamnesis means remembering. And so in our prayer book, and especially during the Eucharistic prayers, when we say, we do this for the remembrance of you, that's a powerful, pregnant Greek word, which really encapsulates the prayer book revision and who we are as Episcopalians. It's like I had people who went to seminary who got that tattooed in Greek on their thing. Story for another day. Anamnesis means remembering. It's the opposite of amnesia, which is forgetting. And so when we pray, and particularly when we celebrate the Lord's Supper, we are remembering, not just in the way of being like, oh, that happened, but we are remembering, we are reenacting, we are reforming our bodies such that we are with Jesus. And it's a Jewish idea from the Passover when they say we were liberated from Egypt along with the Jews. It's not just today. If you've ever been to a Passover dinner, it's not simply a way of saying, remember that happened a really long time ago? Oh, that was really interesting. It's like you're putting yourself in it, and you're understanding by some mystery of time and space that you were there too. And that's how the body becomes Jesus' body. The bread becomes Jesus' body, because all of a sudden you're there. And that's just wild, wacky stuff. And it's incredible. And so it's not a history class. I love history. It's not a history class. It's not simply a way of saying, well, we've always done it. It's a way of saying, they've always done it, we've kept doing it, and now we're doing it again, and we'll always be doing it. And if you can get there, we can set the world on fire, because that what that means for all of us in that remembering. I'm going to leave it there just because I can't improve on that. Any questions before we go? I know we didn't get through everything, but thank you all. This is so great. I'm just loving this. I can't. And apologies if I said anything untoward about either our Episcopal or our Roman Catholic brethren. Chris, go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God, but you're staying here. Yeah. Thanks, good. That's good.